Hi there, everyone. Today we're talking about the many falls of the Romans, from empires to the villages of Rome. Anyway, there's been some coverage on other podcasts, Lex Friedman, about Rome and its multiple falls. And sort of working backwards, you had the Byzantine Empire, which was the Eastern Roman Empire, and that fell in about 1453 after it was overrun by the Turks. And after that, so from the 1453 to now, basically, in many ways, the Russians have been the continuation of the Byzantine Empire. Or they certainly were in architecture and a variety of other things up until the time of the Romanovs. Romanov. So, and the last one was Tsar Nicholas II, and he actually had a nephew, Michael Romanov, who lived in Double Bay in Sydney, who I met once. That was, the Russians were sort of... Now, interestingly, you had Diocletian, otherwise known as Jovius, who took over in 285 AD. He reigned for 20 years, and he set up the Tetrarchy. So you had two Augustuses, so senior emperors, one in each empire, one in the west, one in the east, and then you'd have a Caesar under them, who was a sort of a junior emperor, and they called it a tetrarchy. Very clever idea of Diocletian, who was from Croatia, very clever chap who made his way up on merit, with a lot of luck thrown in as well, as is so often the case. Anyway, the Tetrarchy, he retired. He actually abdicated in 305 AD. After 20 years, after he'd set this system up, and he lived for another 6 years and died in his palace 6 years later. But the Tetrarchy had become unworkable. It really relied on him to be there. And then, of course, Constantine. We had Constantine the Great, who sort of took over and ran everything. And then he had three sons. Constantine did, I think they were Constantius, and Constantine. So a bit of a theme there from Constantine the Great. Not the nicest person in history was Constantine. He did convene the Council of Nicaea that came up with the Bible, so we'll give him marks for that. But ultimately, the Tetrarchy, which is sort of like a multiple form of structure out of, not so much out of Republican Rome, but trying to have a structure and process, devolved into one person, monarchy again. That was really what was going to happen. Okay, despite the best efforts of Diocletian, who deserves a great deal of respect as one of the greatest emperors of Rome. Now, going backwards in time, obviously you have Augustus, who was the nephew of, or great-nephew of Julius Caesar, and Julius Caesar was the nephew by marriage of Marius. Now, those three men, apart from Pompey Magnus and Crassus and a whole lot of other, wonderful chaps, Mark Antony, the 1st century BC, which some people call the Late Republic, was really it was a group of military dictators who had to take over because Rome was such a mess. And I don't feel it's correct to call that the Late Republic. I don't think it was a republic at all. Unless you mean by late republic as in the dead republic, because the republic was dead, long dead by 100 BC, in my opinion. But some people have tried to say that it's the late republic. It wasn't. The republic was not alive at that time. It had been in a lot of trouble for a while, and people don't seem to understand this. Marius, I think, held about several consulships. You were only meant to have one. You could be a proconsul, but it was meant to come off one consulship. Marius had 7. He'd had to reform the army into the cohort and the Capitacense, and he came up with a new javelin even. So he reformed things, and I think reformed their pay as well. But there'd been too much left for Marius to deal with by 105 BC. And when Pompey Magnus took over the first half of the 1st century BC, the reason that Pompey was given all that power to clear out the Mediterranean pirates was because the Romans had the clever idea in the Republic that they would just have a fight with Carthage. And of course, even if they won the fight with Carthage, which ultimately, arguably, they did, winning was losing, because you would lose your number one trading partner in North Africa, the Carthaginians, and secondly, you would lose the Carthaginian navy that kept the Mediterranean free of pirates. So it's a war you didn't want to win. But nevertheless, the Roman Republic thought they'd have a fight with Carthage, and they did, and the Roman Republic lost. because even though Rome won, they could only win by jettisoning the Roman Republic, right? And that's what they did. Rome jettisoned the Roman Republic. That's what winning meant to the Romans, and jettisoning the Roman Republic was a price they were happy to pay at the time. Now, Cannae, the Battle of Cannae in 216, where Hannibal wiped out an army and killed 2 consuls, that was clearly the end of the Roman Republic, because their army didn't work. They couldn't win on the battlefield using consuls. After that, the Scipios were far more in control of incoming decades of military matters, and because you had needed professional military people to deal with big battles like with a group like the Carthaginians. And needless to say, they didn't beat the Carthaginians in one war. It took them 3. And as I say, it was a Pyrrhic victory because they lost their biggest trading partner in North Africa, plus they lost the navy that kept the Mediterranean safe from pirates. And that led to a century of piracy in the Mediterranean, only put down by Pompey Magnus in the 1st century BC, which was the time of the military strongmen, military dictators who were necessary to hold things together, hold Rome together. But also in the 1s, I think there was a couple of consuls who were jailed for spending too much money. So people had had enough of the Republic. They were long tired of the Republic, the 1st century BC, and really the writing was on the wall from Cannae, 216, and once Scipio took over in 200, you can hardly, they weren't giving armies to people in their 40s and 50s. Scipio was much younger, and they weren't keeping to Republican principles. So the Roman Republic was jettisoned by the Romans themselves in order to win their ill-fated war with Carthage, which the first one started in 250 BC. But the Romans were very good at making a nuisance of themselves. They'd fought 3 battles with Pyrrhus around 287 BC, and he won the first 2. And then the third one, I think, was the Romans prevailed, but Pyrrhus got away, only to be killed by a flying roof tile that an old woman threw at him in Argos, I think it was. And once again, you see these victories in inverted commas of the Romans. It's hard to give them a round of applause, except ironically, because the Romans just been unable to win a battle. The only way they could win is to have 3 battles and to keep calling on their allies and win on the third hand with other people. Now, the issue with this is you basically see a republic that is never stable, because in 387 BC, Rome was sacked by a Gallic horde who'd been annoyed by the Etruscans. They had some sort of trading disagreement. That's not positive, Rome being sacked. And then before that, it had taken the Romans over 100 years to prevail on their neighbor, their Etruscan neighbor, Veii. And Veii was one of 36 Etruscan towns. The Romans were never able to absorb the Etruscans because the Romans were the Latin Etruscans, right? The Romans were part of the Etruscan Federation till they walked out and engaged in a massive rebranding. But this inability to prevail for more than 100 years and for the Etruscans to keep on going, the Etruscans motored on. I mean, they were only absorbed in about 27 BC. They outlasted the Roman Republic. And more importantly, is not just the fact the Romans took a long time to prevail over Veii, which was their neighbor, about 20 miles away. They got most of their engineering, agriculture, technology, housing, architecture, all of that, hydrology, from the Etruscans. So we need to be mindful of that, plus religion, plus culture. The Romans really were Etruscan. They were the Latin Etruscans. That's the reality. And the Roman Republic was a massive rebranding that ultimately fell to pieces. The Roman Republic fell to pieces quickly because it was an imperfect copy of the Etruscan Federation, right? And this is a lesson to people in history that it's not so easy to copy great things. And if you don't copy things well enough, then your low-resolution copy can fall to pieces, as the Roman Republic did, because they weren't a good copy of the Etruscans. So it's interesting. I think the thing to learn from the many falls of Rome is they put a lot of effort in, a lot of time, a lot of blood, a lot of treasure into the concept of Roman society, but it took them several good goes to get it right. And the Republic was not it was a good go, but it was a poor, low resolution photocopy of the Etruscan Federation. and it fell apart early on, and certainly long before 100 BC. Thanks.